Hi, everyone. Today I'm joined by Christopher Steffen, who's a cybersecurity analyst, thought leader, zero trust advocate, and technology evangelist working for Enterprise Management Associates, or EMA, as we say, as their VP of research. So thank you, Chris, for taking out the time to join this episode of Cyber PMM.
You got it. Glad to be here.
Yeah, and I know you're very busy. We were just talking before we started recording here about all the different places that you've been, and some of them have had better weather than where we are in Colorado here. So, what have you been up to lately? What's been pulling you around the country?
Yeah, a lot of great stuff going on. This is the pre-conference before RSA, right? And so I was at the Zero Trust World Conference in Orlando a couple weeks ago. All really cool stuff going on in the world of zero trust, in the world of AI, agentic AI, how that relates to, your current infrastructure and where you want to go with your security strategy. Last week, I was in Vegas at the F5 App World Conference talking specifically about API security and their new platformization of their load balancing application delivery content manager solution. And again, really, really respect for ThreatLocker, who did the Zero Trust World Conference, and F5. Great, great companies. Highly recommend them both. All the presentations that I did, plus all the other presentations, are actually online and very much worth taking a look at. Obviously, apart from all that, I am getting ready for RSA. I'll have probably 40 plus meetings at RSA and a presence on the show floor probably a couple times, and so on and so forth. It is the Super Bowl. It is obviously where all the security nerds get together once every year and kind of, try to show everybody in the world what the future looks like and what the trends are going to be for 2025. And I'll give you everybody a little bit of a preview. Center Square is AI. Shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. I know that's what everybody is talking about, but it'll be a good conference. I'm very much looking forward to it.
Yeah, let's look at that a little bit. So, and I want to ask you some other questions about your background, how you got here, and everything. But you brought up RSAC, so if you were somebody that's new to the conference and you're like, what do I do? Where do I go? What, events do I attend? Is there something that you just can't miss when you go out there every year, or that's open to everybody?
Yeah, two things. One is a very selfless, shameless plug. We EMA, create a report every year called Vendor Vision. You can go look at the previous years. They're all out there. We try to highlight 10, 12-ish of the better vendors that are out there going to be exhibiting at RSA, so people can kind of rise above the noise of the conference and visit customers, vendors that are really doing good work. So, of course, go take a look at that report. I will also share, too, one of the things that I always recommend is going to the Security Innovation Sandbox. Usually it's a small booth, and in fact, sometimes it's no more than just like a small table, and it's a company that is, likely brand new, not very mature in the market. They're trying to, I don't know, get people to understand what they're doing. These are the innovators. These are the companies that are doing the next cool thing in cybersecurity. And they're all startups. They're all, funded with, paper clips and toothpicks. And quite bluntly, they are hungry and they're very, very interested in getting the word out. I love them. I love them every year. I always spend a couple hours there, despite the fact that I have literally no time while I'm at the conference. I always make an effort to go and spend a little time there, very simply because these are the companies that you're going to be hearing about in a year, 2 years, 3 years. If you want to get on the ground floor of cybersecurity and the companies that are doing the newest, coolest things, that innovation sandbox is really a good place to start. So spend time on the show floor. It's overwhelming. There's 600 vendors there. It's insane. There really is just no other way to say it. And but the vendors there are absolutely worthwhile. There's always going to be cool innovations going on and worth taking and talking about. But I always take a look at RSA, for those that are going the first time, look at RSA as an opportunity to gain perspective on the technologies that you want, go and visit those vendors specifically, and don't plan on taking and getting an in-depth interview demo, and they will. I'm not trying to dismiss any of those, but do that and take that information home and then have that conversation when you get home in a controlled environment. When you're taking and doing a demo in front of 40,000 people and the show floor, which is so loud, I promise you'll get a better experience if you're doing it over a Teams or a Zoom call. Go through it that way. Make certain that you can get all your questions answered, so on and so forth. So those are the, I guess, little recommendations that I have for people visiting RSA.
Yeah, and I love that. And every year I say I have to go to the innovation sandbox, and I put it on my list. I star it on the scheduler. I never made it yet,
It,
and so I'm
it's
really
literally the
determined.
best. Yeah, it is
Yeah, I
very,
have to
very
get there.
cool. Yeah, it's very, very cool, and I cannot recommend it enough. Some of the biggest, best, brightest companies that you've ever heard of started in that innovation sandbox, and some of them go away, unfortunately, because of funding running out or whatever have you.
Mm.
Some of them become the big companies that you're talking about, and some of them get immediately acquired by Palo Alto or Cisco or whoever the big company is going to be, which is fine. That's not a complaint, but hopefully they bring those innovations into their big companies as well.
And are you seeing a trend toward, you mentioned agentic AI coming into this and what you've been seeing. And so is it becoming easier to get into that type of innovation from a starter or entrepreneurial standpoint because of the advantages that AI brings in terms of development, like no code and building apps that are cool that security teams can use at a more rapid clip? Are we going to see like more interesting things coming out of the innovation sandbox this year, you think?
I think so. I'm really looking forward to seeing what innovation is coming from an AI perspective in general. Last year we were
Hmm.
talking about Gen AI and its ability to write your reports and whatever have you. And I'm not dismissing that. That is a cool thing to do. The next iteration is this agentic AI, basically having a bot in your environment that's going to help you do the stuff that you want to do and augment your security staff. I know one of the concerns that people have the most often, and it's one that's just not rational, is that they're going to AI themselves out of a SOC job. That's not going to happen,
Mm.
not anytime soon, and not with a company that's acting rationally anyway. The reality of it is that you're going to see these companies take and look at agentic AI, gain a level of trust on how it's going to deal with SOC related level one tasks, and then have a true SOC analyst there to oversee what that agentic AI is doing. In theory, this agentic AI is going to reduce your overall costs, and it's going to reduce your overall brain damage. If you can take and have a bot agent, take and do even a portion, let's say 50% of your level one stuff, that allows those SOC analysts to go do better, more important things like investigations and triaging and other cool things that, if you have all those letters behind your name, things that are worthy of all those letters behind your name. So I know that there's a lot of concern about it, and again, we're so early on in the process, it's hard to say exactly what that's going to look like. But in theory, agentic AI is going to be a real game changer, especially for security operations.
Right. It's like kind of like automation, or SOAR has always been in terms of talking about the way you can free up analyst time and, build these workflows that take away some of these basic manual tasks. But AI is kind of like that on steroids, right? Where there's going to be a more, a quicker ability or faster ability to ramp into the world of automation because you don't have to spend as much time configuring everything. Is that what you're seeing? Or do you
Yeah,
think it'll be like really, yeah,
it
go
is,
ahead.
right? I mean, the security space has been using, automation, AI, machine learning for a long time, right? From you're talking to the original firewall monkey, right? Going through, gazillions of firewall logs every day, determining whether something was good, bad, ugly, whatever have you. Now we use automation, machine learning to determine, well, we need to do those things, we don't need to do those things, and 99% of your firewall logs hopefully don't have to be reviewed by a person. We parse them correctly, and you get a good sense of what's going on in your environment by how those firewall logs are parsed. Agentic AI is going to be the same thing, right? You start out small with some very simple tasks about if you see these kind of events, do these kind of things, and you train these models, and then you gain more confidence in these models being able to do the right thing. The kicker is not whether it's going to do the right thing, it's the ability of executive managers and quite bluntly the practitioner to have confidence that it's not going to burn the building down, right? One of the big problems early on with AI just in general is that it hallucinates. And so when you're writing a report on Abraham Lincoln and it says it chopped down the cherry tree, well, obviously it mixed the metaphors there with George Washington, and you move on and life continues forward. If you're talking about the keys to the kingdom in your data center environment, you can't really afford for your agentic AI to hallucinate. And so you need to have that level of confidence that it's not going to go cattywampus and give the nuclear launch codes to the Terminator and then move on. We're getting there. We're getting there. In fact, we get better and better about it every single day. But as an organization, you need to have, it doesn't do you any good for me to tell you that AI is going to be great. You need to experience it yourself in your environment, doing things that are important to you, gain confidence, gain that experience, and then you're going to find out what a kind of a differentiator it's going to be.
Yeah, play around with it. See, why not test it out? And it's
You got it.
similar even on the product marketing front where I live. I tell colleagues of mine or others, just try out some of these tools. Just get in there. If you haven't really started prompting anything or jumping into LLMs, just give it a shot. And the worst that could happen is you learn something. And obviously, if you're in a live environment in a SOC, that's different. I'm talking about testing and safe, quarantined kind of places. But to your point, we don't want to activate the Terminator and trigger a meltdown here. But
You
yeah,
should
so
absolutely be
you
trying it in
mentioned,
your. You should
yeah,
be trying it in your lab, right? I mean, I have a
the
lab
lab,
sitting here
that's the
right
word.
behind me, right? And
There
so,
you go.
you go ahead and blow up your lab, and your lab should
Yeah.
be, a dozen instances on some cloud, blah blah blah, whatever. Great, knock yourself out, okay? And if you blow them away, guess what? You set it up again. It's no big deal. Same thing. Give it a shot in testing. Do not do all your testing in QA, or do not do your testing in production. I I guess I assume that's cybersecurity
Yeah.
101, but
Right.
this is one of those things I guess we need to mention every once in a while. We had the CrowdStrike outage, several months ago, and that literally happened because you weren't testing things in a QA environment first. It literally happened because you deployed something that you had not tested directly into your production environment, thinking that it was fine, and you had every reason to believe that it was fine. But had you deployed it into a testing environment first, you would have seen that it blue screened to death everything. That's bad. That's the definition of bad, and therefore you would not have deployed it into production. It's just that simple. If you are a graybeard like I am, you realize that you can't do that. I was trying to maintain a five nines data center, way back in my career, and I promise you, we have never deployed it into production because we had 8 zillion safeguards that prevented us from deploying directly into production without testing it first. So we've forgotten some of those things. Maybe it's time to remember some of those things. But again, try these new technologies, try these updates, try them in your test and dev environments, then deploy them after you have that confidence, then try them in your production.
Love that. Yeah. Experiment. Get in there. And okay, I want to switch gears a little bit here. Talk zero trust for a second. You have this quote that I saw, and I was like, I have to ask Chris about that because that's interesting. I am constantly, here's a quote, I am constantly worried about zero trust being commoditized into a set of compliance controls that don't mean anything. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, and that quote's been all over the place, and I mean it just as much as the day I said it. One of the biggest concerns, so let's step back for a minute. So, zero trust is a philosophy. It is the idea of least privilege. It is the idea of, trust but verify, or trust no one, depending on who you talk to. And it's the idea of taking and having a resilient architecture that has the ability to withstand attacks better than pretty much without that kind of stuff. It revolves around data, identity, the applications, your infrastructure being tolerant and only allowing those that you have verified and authenticated to access those resources. Okay, so let's start there.
Hmm.
And so then
Okay.
when you start talking about zero trust in general, it's obviously a really, again, when you're talking about filling out your bingo card for RSA, zero trust will be on there. It won't be center square, but it'll be on there somewhere for sure. And when you
Hmm.
talk about zero trust, there's a lot of companies out there that are trying to sell you zero trust in a box. And I hate that. There's no such thing. There is no way that you can buy a solution and somehow magically achieve zero trust. It is the combination of a lot of various solutions working in parallel to take and get you to that level. There's a couple different organizations, the Cloud Security Alliance being one of them, that are coming out with standards, ideas, methodologies that an organization can follow to better understand where they need to, what they need to do and where they need to go to achieve zero trust. But none of those documents will say that go to ABC vendor, buy their product, and boom, you have zero trust. My concern, and where that quote comes from, is that there are some organizations that are starting to talk about setting up a set of controls that you could follow. And if you follow those controls, you do ABC and 1, 2, 3, you are now zero trust. It's not that way. That's not how it's ever going to be. And I don't want zero trust to be commoditized that way. It is a level of security, it's a level of maturity. There's a great outfit out there called Numberline Security. They just came out with a zero trust maturity model. It
Mm.
is literally the best in the industry. And you can
Yeah, I
take
saw
that.
you. I just saw your post on that. I was going to ask you
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah, they literally came up with this set of controls, and it's not really controls. It's guideposts where you can determine that my organization on a scale from 1 to 5, let's say, is rated a 2. And here's what it would need to do to be rated a 3. Here's what it would need to do to be rated a 4. And then on the second criteria, it's rated a 1. Here's what we need to do to be rated a 2. And so you can make a determination of where you want to be. Do you want to be at a level 3 across the board? Sounds very reasonable to me. A lot harder than it sounds, but it sounds very reasonable. 5 is practically unachievable. And that's fine.
Mhm.
I mean, those are your stretch goals. But taking and looking at that kind of maturity model will give you a much better sense of what you need to do in order to gain the maturity to become zero trust, whatever. I say all that it is not dependent on a particular product. It is not dependent on a particular environment. It is literally assessing where you are today, and there's a self-assessment part there that you can actually hire them to do another assessment, and really understand here are the key aspects of zero trust. Here's where you are today. Here's what you can do tomorrow to get you just that much further. And so on a spectrum, again, just for simple math, 1 through 5, you're rated overall to be a 2.4. And here's the 8 things that you might be able to do to get to a 3. And then if you're at a
Mhm.
3, here are the 27 things that you need to do to get to a 4. And if you're at a 4, here are the 175 billion things that you need to do to get to a 5. And it's not that many. It really isn't. Zero
And
trust is
all of
not
this is
complicated.
just to, this is all documented in where again? What was that report?
Yeah, it's called the Zero Trust Maturity Model from Numberline Security. But there's a number of other organizations. Like I said, the CSA has a number of these documents in these different
Okay.
pillars. All that
Hmm.
stuff is free. Go there and take a look. We talk
Yeah.
about it all the
I'll
time.
drop
But
this in the show notes and make sure everybody has access. This is good
yeah,
stuff.
absolutely. But take a look there. And again, if you have any questions about Zero Trust, you can always just ping me directly on LinkedIn. I'm always available to answer those questions. It's part of the thing that I do as one of the co-chairs of the Zero Trust Working Group. Happy to be able to answer some of those questions for you.
Would you be willing to star in a movie with Chase Cunningham called Zero Trust 30?
I would absolutely. And Chase Cunningham, he was actually at Zero Trust World, and he and I were sitting there and talking a bit about just Zero Trust in general. He and I talk about every other week or so, just about the stuff that's going on with Zero Trust. He and Jason Garbus and John Kindervag were all part of that same group at the Cloud Security Alliance, trying to promote a better Zero Trust. And again, shameless plug, at the RSA conference this year, John Kindervag is giving a session on the history of Zero Trust over the last 15 years since he kind of coined the term. So again, go check him out
Perfect. You
at
mentioned
CSA.
history. I love, since history is like my favorite thing to talk about for context purposes. But John Kindervag, remind the audience, right? He's somehow is he the founder of the term zero trust? How did that all
He is,
develop? Because you were probably
yes,
there. Yeah.
yeah, I was, and he did. So he was an analyst at Forrester, and he came up with this idea again about 15 years ago about zero trust, and he wrote his report.
Okay.
It has been widely used since then. The poor guy, he works for a company called Illumio now. He is on the road. I mean, he might as well sprout feathers, right? He is constantly talking about it to this day. But his insights on zero trust are fantastic. One of the things that he will tell you right off the bat, and John, I apologize if you're hearing this right off the bat if I'm misquoting you, but don't make it so dang complicated. You know, the KISS methodology really applies here. Keep it simple, stupid, right? And it really is. I think that we as a security realm, but zero trust especially, make things way more complicated, and it really doesn't have to be that way. When you take a look at zero trust, nobody is really starting out with a green field. Everybody is starting from somewhere, and that's the kicker: understanding where you're starting from and how to get yourself better. It doesn't have to happen all overnight. It can happen very incrementally, but even incremental changes will improve your security. And so, long story short, that's John's message. Don't take my word for it. Go and listen to John. You can take and Google him. You can take and look on YouTube. He's on there too. Come to the CSA meetings. He's always there taking and chatting too. And last but not least, again, he'll be presenting at RSA this year.
Okay. Perfect. Yeah. So you can, and if you can't attend RSAC physically, because that's sometimes, going into San Fran isn't as easy for many folks out there. So can you listen to a lot of this virtually about what's happening? Do you think this is going to be, or is it all, or you're not sure?
I don't know. That's obviously
Okay.
going to be up to RSA. I know that they do record a number of the sessions. His session will be very widely attended, would be my assumption. So I would
Yep.
assume that it'll be recorded. Trust
Okay.
me when I tell you that there will be a summary and a replay of his session online in some form or another,
Perfect.
even if it's one that he wrote himself and posts on his blog somewhere too. So again,
Cool.
worth checking out when it's all said and done. It'll certainly be out there for people to consume in one way or another.
Okay. So that's 15 years ago. And I know that that's just scratching the surface when it comes to your depth of history in the industry. And so take us back, Chris. So you got started, what's your kind of intro into the industry story? Because you've
Yeah,
seen kind of, a lot of the developments in this industry. So what got you into it?
yeah. My entry into the industry is not the normal industry story by any means. I started out in college working for a company, credit reporting company. I was the 21st employee or whatever the number was, and did that for a little bit, but then went to finish my degree and actually was the press secretary for the state of Colorado, for the Colorado Speaker of the House. Loved that job. It was everything that you could ever dream of it being. It was the greatest job in the world. But then I finished that job and was going to go work on a U.S. Senate campaign, and I got invited back to the company that I was just mentioning, basically saying we were just acquired. We need to take and move a whole bunch of our stuff. Do you have some time to do this? And I kind of did, but kind of didn't, but did anyway. And really started to help them better understand. They were a very immature company, and then the goal was to build a security and compliance practice that they could be worthy of a credit reporting company. I did that for about a decade. Built data centers, built the network operations group, built their compliance practice, and left the company as their chief architect again after a decade, and then did a whole bunch of other stuff, including a chief evangelist at Hewlett Packard, chief evangelist at DXC Technologies. I did my stint at Google for a little bit. I worked at another networking startup as their evangelist. I really have always fundamentally believed in having the ability to go out there and talk about security with everybody from the practitioner, tinfoil hat types to the pointy hair boss executive level. In between all that, I became a CIO of a financial services organization. And then about 5 years ago, I became an analyst to kind of try to give back, right? Didn't really have to work a whole lot anymore, but I love doing what I do and getting out there and evangelizing on why this security stuff is important. And so that's what I do. I write the reports that I'm interested in. I try to give a very fair practitioner level perspective on the interesting security stuff of the day and share that information as often as I can with anybody who's interested in listening.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's so cool to hear that background and understand your roots and how you got to where you are. And speaking of where you are, some of that research that you're currently focused on, again, obviously zero trust. You mentioned some of the agentic AI capabilities that are being emerging, and your focus, or at least your interest in innovation and what's the latest that's out there. So on that thread, if you were to say you had $100 million, let's just magically say that, and you were to drop it, on an investment in cybersecurity that could really make an impact or a dent into, the practitioner's capability to defend against the latest threats, like where would you put your money?
So I'll give you two perspectives. You mentioned my buddy Chase. He'll tell you that you should buy the breach, right? And so the perfect example is one that we just talked about, which was CrowdStrike. If you had $100 million and you want to change it to $200 million, taking and buying a security company that was probably just breached and their stock obviously plummets makes all the sense in the world. CrowdStrike, and I have said this multiple times, despite the fact that they had their boo-boo, they are an outstanding security company. And yes, we all make mistakes. Yes, they had one. Yes, they created new policies and procedures to fix that. And they're a great security company to invest in. If my goal was to make money very quickly, I would have bought that breach, kept it for 90 days, and then I think their stock dropped like 9 or 10% and then went up 12 or 13%. So again, great way to do it. If my goal is to take and do something that's going to make a huge impact on the practitioner, or really just in security in general, I would be investing in API security. There was a great conversation at F5 that I attended last week, and it really talks about, I was presenting with their field CISO, and just talking about how APIs are such a critical pathway and becoming more and more so especially when you consider agentic AI and AI in general. One of the parts that I don't think that we're talking enough about is the connections to all the back end systems and external systems that an agentic AI needs to be able to have in order to be able to function. But we forget that we need to provide security around those APIs. They're literally taking and allowing us to connect to the keys to the kingdom. And so understanding your APIs, understanding how those APIs are communicating, how they're documented, so on and so forth, I think is a critical nature. I think it's something that we are not nearly paying enough attention to. I think that there's several companies that are really paying attention to them, and I really appreciate that. But that is an area that I think that the practitioner, and quite bluntly, the business in general, really needs to be focusing on as we go forward in 2025 and 2026.
There you have it, API security. And is AI going to impact API security? Like, will there be less need for APIs? I'm just trying to understand.
No,
I don't technically know the answer to that.
Yeah, it'll be 100 times worse, right? And so
worse, right?
Okay. Yeah, so, or more, right? So if and worse is not a good way of putting it. You will need API security more. So, for example,
right.
you and I are taking and talking with each other. There's a connection between you and a connection between me, and we live happily ever after, and we're good to go. When an AI is involved, it needs to go pull multiple sources to come up with an answer. Okay, and so maybe that's an internal database. Maybe it is looking at a data store that you have over in an S3 bucket. Maybe it is looking at some telemetry from your SIM solution. Maybe it is looking externally at like a Salesforce solution or an Oracle database that you have hosted outside, or maybe you have a third-party provider that's it's going to pull information from that you're going to need. So in that example, I pulled up what 5, 6 different connections that your agentic AI is going to need to query in order to provide you an answer that's going to satisfy the question that you asked it. That's a very simple example, and it could be 2x that number, it could be 3x that number, I don't know. Depending on what the query is, depending on how mature the agentic AI is, that number very, very quickly escalates. Do you have visibility, do you have documentation on every API that agentic AI solution is using? And the answer is you do not. You might think you do, and you might be better than even a lot of companies, and you might know 90%, 95% of them. Okay? And kudos to you. I hope that's the case. If you are the average, the answer is no. And that means that you probably don't know a quarter of the APIs that your agentic AI is going to use. It might be worse. So understanding those APIs, understand how AI is going to impact the APIs in your environment today, I think is a critical path for everybody to be considering. But even if you think that you have a really solid handle on all the APIs in your environment, I promise you that you're missing some, and some that you probably don't want to miss. I think things really simple, like the API that your refrigerator is using to call back to Samsung for your smart refrigerator. I know that sounds ridiculous, but it's very real. What data is that refrigerator sending back? Does it have a camera? So on and so forth. I mean, that's a simple example, and I've used it a couple different times where people that think they know everything that's going on in their environment at any given time, and yet they forgot that they have a smart toaster in their break room.
Yeah. Right. Or the TV or whatever
Or the
else. Just look at all
TV,
the,
or yeah.
yeah. Yeah. And why like a washing machine needs, that
Toothbrush.
type of
Toothbrush. That's the one that
toothbrushes.
just
Yeah.
blows me away. A toothbrush.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's so you look at that as an expanding attack surface then, is that right? APIs are a part of the attack surface now. Is that right? So
They
they're
absolutely are, right?
providing
And
the okay.
well, think about it this way, right? So I have a standalone computer that I can take and secure to the nth degree so that you, Dane, nor anybody else could ever get in the entire world. And very simply, the way that I do that, I just disconnect it from a network. It's a standalone box. It's not connected to anything. It's as secure as I can physically make it. It's not going to traverse outside of that room. Great. Okay. Then it used to be that we used to have our computers very, very protected behind a firewall. And so you had a very protected environment, but a lot of environments had flat networks. And so once you got into that computer, you had access to that entire network environment. We don't work that way anymore, no matter how you look at it. We're very interconnected. You could be working from a Starbucks or from a hotel room. I mean, I did a webinar last week, literally, that went to hundreds of people from a hotel room on the 63rd floor of the Fontainebleau Hotel in Las Vegas. That was not something that you could have even done all that long ago. And the number of connections that you need to have in order to make something like that work is numerous. And so if I am the bad guy and I want to get into your environment, I am going to do my best to take and exploit an API that already has the credentials. We already think that it's supposed to be there. And then a lot of times it has the keys to the kingdom that I can then go traverse all these other data sources and collect whatever information I want. So yes,
Interesting. Yeah.
data is critical. Yes, please take and do proper security hygiene. But part of that security hygiene needs to be understanding what the status of the APIs that connect in and out of your environment are.
Yeah, and I didn't until you just taught me about this, I didn't realize that every API needs credentials. I mean, that's the key, isn't it? It's because
Yeah,
APIs
it's
have access into your,
even
device
yeah,
or
even as something as simple as like the podcast that we're doing right now. The solution that we used to get it had a key to let us join, right? And so there's a password.
yeah,
It's a string that's this long, whatever it is,
yeah,
and you have to have that key in order to get in. Now there is a connection between you and me and the service that we're using to take and record the podcast and whatever other solutions that they're out there using in order to make that podcast happen. And this is simple. I mean, this is very, very easy, but there's multiple APIs going on right now, right here, in order to make our
hmm
podcast work. Talk about something like a database call. Talk about something like an agentic AI call to gain understanding of what all that's going on in a particular environment. You're talking about
yeah,
dozens of APIs. So yeah, it can be
absolutely.
it can
Yeah, it's funny.
escalate very quickly.
Like I was testing out this tool called Relevance AI because you can build an agent. And then when I was in there building this agent, just testing it out, like we were talking about before, just breaking things and learning, they have this capability called sub agents. And so you're basically building this, like you were calling it, it's just like all these APIs that are plugging in because you can plug into, I mean, there's some agents that are going to have hundreds of sub agents, right? I think, you know, it was like Mark Benioff recently did a interview about creating, that he's doing this agent force push, and it's like he's focusing all of his time on agent force and creating, like billions of agents eventually, right? And so you're spot on, I guess, with this API risk that we're entering into is going to just kind of expanding, right? So
Yeah, and
cool.
gaining again the key of all of that, Dean, is security is important. It's the same conversation that I have about data and data security too. Yes, you can encrypt your data. Yes, you can take and figure all that out. But if you don't know that the data exists, you can't really protect it. And once you think that you know where all your data is, start over again because new data was created while you were doing it. It's the same thing with APIs. You would think that you have a finite number of APIs, and you likely do. But the idea that you're going to know them all is pretty unlikely. And then once you've discovered them, then you can triage and decide how you're going to deal with them, address them, protect them, document them within your environment. But API
Mm.
discovery is critically important. So start there.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it's also part of zero trust as we look at the model. Is that right? Is it part of that maturity model where maybe number 4 or 3 is APIs? I don't know. I haven't looked at that model,
Yeah,
but
it will be right. You need to protect your applications and the connections that come into your applications, right? And so
okay.
that's all going to be part of that same kind of conversation. Again, when you're starting zero trust, let's start with identity first because that's easy, right? And you're not starting from nowhere. Everybody's used username and passwords, and you probably have access to an
Mhm.
Active Directory and blah blah blah. So you're not starting at ground
Yeah.
zero. Understand where you are and then move from there. But then once you take it and move a few steps forward, you understand how your applications connect into your environment and the permissions that come with those applications. A lot of those are going to be API driven. So you give permission to, again, I'll pick on Salesforce, let's say. You have information that's dumped up into Salesforce and you want to have a connection back and forth to be able to retrieve and send information. That makes perfect sense. Understand the
hmm
API that you're using to be able to do that and the security around it. It's not complicated. And then from there, if it needs to be different, you can decide then intelligently what you need to do differently. But at least knowing where you are, knowing where you can start, that's a critical part that I think that we always forget, that we think we know every damn thing, and quite bluntly, we don't know everything that we need to know about our environment.
Yeah, and it's those blind spots that you got to be most concerned about. It's great advice here. So Chris, let's switch gears a little bit here. So, one thing I always like to do is give tips to product marketers and solutions marketers and technology marketers that are out there, because often, we're we're not the most liked, category of profession that's in
Which is
cyber because
absolute crap, by the way.
it
Okay,
is,
so
isn't it?
well, but let me share that real quick because that's worth
Yeah.
mentioning anyway. So again, I've been a tinfoil hat type for a long, long time, and a lot of times you hold your marketing brethren in disdain because they're not real technologists and blah 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 whatever. That's all nonsense to me. I will tell you that you can have the greatest security product on the face of the planet Earth, and if your marketing people don't tell anybody about it, it doesn't matter how good it is. Okay. Same
Mm.
thing with evangelism. When you talk about product marketing people and their ability to take and talk with any number of people of any persona that you can come up with about the benefits of a particular solution, that is what takes and has the ability to gain adoption of your solution. I'm not even talking about sales. I mean, yes, there's money involved, and yes, I'm a capitalist. I understand. We need to make money. But at the same time, I am not after the money. I am after about the idea. And so from a marketing perspective, taking and talking about the idea without really having to take and promote a product is critically important. When I do my podcast and when I take and do a lot of presentations, rare is the day that you hear me shilling for a product. I am out there shilling for an idea. And the idea
Mm.
is a thought leadership idea to try to get people to understand why this concept makes all the sense in the world. So for all you security types out there, all you technology types out there that are poo-pooing your marketing team, get a grip, understand that you probably don't have the ability to do their job, and their job is at least as important as yours, if not more important, because all the cool little bells and whistles that you are creating today will be for naught if your marketing team doesn't understand and doesn't have the ability to share with people why your bells and whistles are so cool.
Right. It's sometimes it's like don't shoot the messenger, on our side where we are bringing a message about, a certain product capability. And your concept is your idea is kind of the product, right? That thing you're evangelizing, that thought leadership essentially is a product that you're bringing to market, like an audience. And so, and we also are involved with a lot of analyst briefings. We're writing content that educates buyers. We're building a presence at RSAC, and so we're constantly thinking and trying to put the buyer in the as the hero of the story. So, any tips that you would recommend, like that we can do to sharpen that capability of, in cyber specifically, of bringing that message into a buyer when they're along that journey?
Yeah, I'll give you two. The first one
Okay.
is you're thinking about the personas that you want to sell to, but you're not thinking about all the personas. And
Mm.
so many deals I have seen have been derailed by personas that you didn't take into consideration. For example, again, we're talking about cybersecurity in general. Of course, you're going to write for the security engineer. You're likely have a one pager or a battle card for the CISO, maybe even the CTO, maybe the CIO, maybe even somebody like the CEO or board of directors. You might have those battle cards. Where is your battle card for the CFO? This is the
Mm.
guy who literally writes the check. Literally. Okay.
Yeah.
And I'll share a story with you, and this is a true story. I was in a organization and talking with the general manager, and he was basically saying, "You are a great security evangelist, and I don't want you to change your message, but your message is not correct. And the inherent barrier for this particular solution is not a security barrier, it's an actuary barrier." And I'm like, what the heck are you talking about? In the particular instance, this company had already bought and spent $30 million on an infrastructure that they needed to depreciate before they could go invest in the solution in the cloud. And so the
Mm.
inherent barrier in that case was not security. The inherent barrier was the financial side of it, having to depreciate that investment before that team was allowed to go play in some other patch. It was eye-opening for me. It literally changed my perspective on security, that you have to remember that security is not limited to the boxes and wires and the stuff that you like to play with. There is also the aspect of being in security and how you are contributing to the overall business. And as a security practitioner, if you can understand that, the better off you're going to be. The second one, so there's that story, and then there's this story. one of the things that I have always tried to do a lot is be that value added friend in the security business. Okay. When I say that, I mean going and giving a commercial to a bunch of practitioners on your particular product is really not going to be interesting. It just isn't. Nobody really likes commercials now. We have streaming services today that have, you can either fast forward or eliminated the commercials altogether. Why? Because we hate commercials. Okay. Practitioners don't like commercials any more than anybody else does. And so, but if you're going in there as a trusted advisor and saying, here's the things that you can take and do to improve your overall security infrastructure, and whether you buy from us or not is really irrelevant. We want you to improve your security infrastructure, and here are the ways they're going to do that. Now, by application, they're obviously going to look at your product as being able to address some of those things. So I'm not so crazy to say divorce your product completely. That's not what I'm saying at all. But even if they don't take and buy your product today, they will come back and remember that, hey, that guy was more interested in trying to help us secure our environment than sell us whatever widgets he's trying to sell. And I'm going to remember that. And I'm going to look at his product next time that my sales cycle, buying cycle comes around, my budgeting cycle, because I'm really interested in working with those kind of people. We forget about those fundamentals too often in marketing, in security in general, that people are interested in how they're going to fix their problem, and we decide that we're going to sell them and tell them why our product is great regardless of whatever their problem is. And so there's always a disconnect there, and that's something that we need to be addressing more and more.
Great tips there. And for your last question, Chris, what would you say is the best way to not botch an analyst briefing? So, what should we be doing more of in analyst briefings to succeed?
Yeah, that's a great question too. I really like the conversations, right? I mean, I don't need slideware. You're going to send me your slides anyway. That's fine. Send them to me because I'm going to look at them. I promise you. I am far more interested in a one-on-one conversation about where you're going, where you came from, and what you're doing today that makes you a differentiator in the market. Again, not necessarily about your specific product and, you know, the bells and whistles that you're doing. That's interesting to a degree, but I'm far more interested in what makes you tick. Why did you decide to do what you're going to do? What are you going to do in the future that is going to set you off apart from somebody else? There's always that thing. And every company that I've ever talked to, and I literally talk to hundreds and hundreds a year. Every company that I talk to, I ask those kind of questions, and about a quarter of the time, I get the answer that I'm looking for. I'm getting that answer that we are absolutely crazy. We're dedicated to doing these kind of things. We started out in a basement, and we started out because we were looking for this problem to be solved, and we decided that nobody else was doing a good job, so we're going to solve this problem ourselves. And now we've developed a massively huge product to save the practitioner hours and hours and hours a week of brain damage. And that's because that's what we wanted. That's the product that we were looking for and never got to have. I speak from that experience. I mean, when I was taking and doing a whole bunch of stuff on virtualization, Microsoft didn't have a virtual machine manager at the time. So we were actually part of the TAP program that went and helped them create the very, very first ever Microsoft Virtual Machine Manager. Again, this was 20 some years ago. It was wonderful. We absolutely loved it. But they took a lot of the things that we were doing right there at the time and incorporated in the virtual machine manager. Why? Because we were doing it. This was what we wanted. This is what we were looking for. And they needed those ideas to create a product that people were going to want to use, not just to create a product for the sake of creating a product. So getting out there and trying to address specific use cases and specific things that a customer is going to need or that an analyst is looking for, I think is critical.
That's gold. Thanks so much for sharing that, Chris. And is there any requests you have of the audience here?
I don't, other than, if you see me, you can't miss me at RSA. I'm the big bearded guy. My voice even booms at RSA. Believe it or not, you can't miss it. Come shake my hand. Come say hi. I'll likely be rushing to the next meeting, but I'm always willing to take and say hi to folks. And keep on being secure. Don't forget your security fundamentals. And If you ever have any questions on things that I can do to help, you can always find me on LinkedIn. You can always find me at EMA. Ping me, let me know, and I'll do what I can to help.
Excellent. Well, that's a wrap for this episode of the Cyber PMM podcast. Chris, thanks so much for your time and insights here. Really appreciate it. Yeah, and hope to bump into you out at RSAC.
You got it. I appreciate it. Thanks, Dane.